And noticing how easy it, oh, you guys are writing on the board. I hate to disrupt that process. How about if you just quietly find your places on this side of the room? Oh, there you go. You're done already. You bet. Thank you. And very much thank you for already starting to put some beliefs up there. This morning is when those beliefs start becoming really handy, to just have beliefs that you can whip out and use right off the top of your head, yours or someone else's. Okay, so welcome again this morning. And this morning we're going to be continuing with sleight of mouth patterns. And by the way, just to give you more of a definition sort of thing of what sleight of mouth is as compared to the other patterns we're learning over the 3 days. Sleight of mouth patterns are ways of reframing beliefs. So you could consider them an expansion of the reframing pattern that you learned, the context and meaning reframing patterns that you learned at practitioner level. And presuppositions are a delivery system. And it's possible to presuppose an outcome, to presuppose a message, to presuppose a sleight of mouth pattern. So they're a way of saying something that is different from just saying it directly. So those are two very powerful sets of language patterns that, of course, are most powerful combined and used together. And so this morning, we are continuing with our sleight of mouth patterns. Model of the world is your first sleight of mouth pattern, and we're building now on that set. We'll be doing 3 quick exercises, 3 quick pieces of content that each have 2 or 3 sleight of mouth patterns in them. And so we're going to be keeping the pace fairly quick this morning. Then later in the morning, we're going to have a sleight of mouth pattern that's a little longer. And it's a little bit more a scripted exercise like you're accustomed to from other portions of your NLP training. Then this afternoon, we'll be coming back to presuppositions and have a longer exercise again in the afternoon. Okay, now before we begin, I just want to offer you just a few minutes, say 3, 4, 5 minutes. If you have lingering questions or something that you would really like to tie up from yesterday before we dive into the material of today. You don't have to, but if there is something that's kind of been bouncing around in your brain that you'd like to ask about, now's a chance. Or not. And like I say, that's totally fine. I just wanted to give you the opportunity if there was something. Okay, so a couple of examples of the pattern I'm going to be demonstrating this morning. We're going to start each time with examples. Probably the easiest way to demonstrate this with examples to begin with is to go live. And if you would offer a belief that you have or that you are aware of in others that involves an A and a B that's already well formed in terms of A equals B and A causes B and it's a limiting belief, then I will demonstrate the pattern. Yes?
Because you drink and drive, you have no concern for the safety of others.
Okay. Because you drink and drive, you have no concern for the safety of others. Now, is that a belief you want to change?
No.
Okay. All right. So it is a complex equivalence. It is an A and B form. It's just that bit about wanting to change it that, okay. So, and if nobody comes up with one, I have a few here on the board. So if somebody would just stand up and pretend to be a salesperson with that belief, then I can demonstrate the pattern with that. Yes?
The louder and faster I talk, the more people will buy.
Okay, the louder, and so stay here. So the louder and faster you talk, the more people will buy.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And I'm curious whether there's ever been any customer for which the louder and faster you talked, the more they went away and bought from somebody else. Okay. Okay. Somebody else with a limiting belief, either your own or someone else's?
Learning slower than someone else means I'm stupid.
Okay, learning slower than someone else you believe means you're stupid. And have there been times also when you have noticed that you were learning faster than someone else?
Maybe.
Okay, maybe. And do you know somebody else that learns really quick even though they're stupid? that you notice they're not maybe the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but whatever they learn fast. Okay. Okay, so another example. Okay?
You know, if I listen to my adversary, I'll be so weak.
If you listen to your adversary or your adversary, depending on where you're from, you'll be weak.
Yeah.
Okay, that's your belief at this point in time. And so I'm wondering, when has listening to your adversary allowed you to negotiate even more effectively?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And also, so when has there been a time when you weren't negotiating very well, even though you were paying no attention to your adversary?
Well, that's a point.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now this pattern I'm sure is familiar to you as well from other NLP that you've had. And because it's so useful in loosening up beliefs, we're including it in sleight of mouth patterns. So if I offer you a belief to apply the pattern to, such as, if someone asks a skeptical question, they won't buy. Now, how can you apply this pattern to me? If someone asks a skeptical question, then I just know they're not going to buy.
Have they ever?
Great. Has there been a time when somebody has asked a skeptical question and they have bought? Great. Now, the pattern, of course, is counterexample. And a key question that you can ask yourself to generate counterexamples is, when is this not true? That's basically what we're going for with counterexample. When is this not true? Now, it's also possible, the ones that we've basically demonstrated have been A is true, but B is not true. Or A is not true, yet B is true. And in Anne's case, I demonstrated both of those. One of them didn't seem to work very well, so I went ahead and did the other form, and that one worked really well. So the first one was, actually the first one I did, this one, yeah. So when have you listened to your adversary and it made you more effective? And that didn't work so well for her as she was playing this role. But when we said, so when did you not listen to your adversary and yet you still weren't effective? That she came up with examples for, and that worked for shifting her experience. Now, it's also possible to do a counterexample of just A or just B. And these typically are weaker than going for the relationship. But nevertheless, it's a useful way to apply it in some situations. So for example, in Gene's case, so he was saying, so even though I learned slower than someone else, because I learned slower than somebody else, that means I'm stupid. So I could just go for a counterexample of being stupid. So Gene, when have you done something that you knew was smart? Okay, so that's going for a counterexample of just B. And I could go for a counterexample of just A. So Gene, I bet there's been a time when you were learning faster than another person. Okay, so that's just A. All right, now the next pattern is closely related to this. So I'll go ahead and dive into it. First of all, I was working with a client one time, and she had a belief that she was not able to attract respectful people to be in a relationship with. And that's her conclusion, of course. So then to find the A side of that, I asked her, so how do you know this? She said, Well, I've never done it before. Yeah, that did it for her. So because I've never done it before, I know I can't attract somebody who's very respectful to be in a relationship with. So since she already said she had never done it before, I decided to go someplace else for the counterexample. So I asked her, is this something that you believe is true of all people, that no one can attract a respectful person to be in a relationship with, or do you just believe it's true of you right now? And she said, well, no, some people can attract respectful people to be in relationships with. So then I asked her, now, what do those people do differently than you do that allows them to attract a respectful person? Okay, so went a little bit further than just this pattern. I added a little something onto it as well. As you can imagine, putting these pieces together makes them more effective. So that's one example. The next example I'll give you, one time a woman went in to see Milton Erickson, and she was extremely overweight and self-conscious about it, to the point that she had difficulty keeping her appointments with Milton. And her belief was that because I am so ugly, I will never have a good relationship with a man. No man will have me. And so Milton said, okay. Now he was famous for giving people tasks, assignments that they had to go out and do in the world in order to accomplish a change. So he said, now what I want you to do is, I want you to stand on that street corner, and I want you to watch people go by, and I want you to notice all of the ugly, disgusting, enormous women that walk by holding the hand of a man. And she did. Now, if I were working with this woman, I might have gone about it a little differently. Milton had his own style. Nevertheless, this was something that worked for her in terms of changing this belief that she could have a man, could have a relationship. Okay, so now again, if I do one of these beliefs, back to you, if I listen to my adversary, I'll be weak. How can you deliver this pattern to me? So like a counterexample, but it's a special case of counterexample.
But that would be the time you listen to the adversary and gain such deep understanding.
Okay, and that is a counterexample, and it's not quite the pattern I'm going for. It's a counterexample, but yeah, well, excellent. And when things pop up for you that are other patterns that you've already learned, that just is an example of unconscious competence. It really is. I know that that's a quote reframe, but it's really true too in my experience. As the training goes along, you'll find that these little exercises you've done, the patterns that you've learned will start popping up automatically in future exercises. So somebody else for this, yeah.
So have you ever watched a great negotiator and noticed the information that they gather from their adversary that's useful?
Excellent, yeah. So that's still a counterexample, and it's a special case because we're looking at the experience of others instead of finding it in the person's own experience.
Have you ever listened?
So we call this switch referential index. And a key question here is, for whom is this not true? And again, you can find a switch referential index counterexample of just A, just B, A but not B, not A but B. Now, by the way, another way to do this, in addition to asking the person, have you noticed somebody, it's also possible to supply an example. For example, with this one, you know, Gandhi really listened to the British and learned all he could about how the British thought, what they believed, what was important to them. And of course, all he accomplished was independence from England. You know, so you know, supplying an example, historical example, or somebody that you know is another way to apply the pattern. Okay, one more example of this. The switch referential index can be such a useful subset of counterexample that I'll give you one more. Connie Ray was working with a woman on nail biting, I believe it was, with the swish pattern. The swish pattern didn't work, and the person came back in to find out, what else needed to change so that she could have the behavior change she wanted. And so Connie Ray was gathering information to find out, and it turned out that this woman had this belief that since she'd made so many mistakes in her life, and she really had, she'd made a lot of really, really big mistakes that had drastic consequences. So because she'd made so many mistakes in her life, she didn't deserve to get this change. She kind of needed to punish herself for all those terrible things that she had done in her life. And so Connie Ray asked her, so I'm curious if what you really want is to punish yourself for the mistakes that you've made. Is this something that you want to teach your daughter to do? Would you rather your daughter goes out and if she makes some mistakes, goes out in life and gets what she wants and goes past them? Or would you rather that she just sits around at home and dwells on how awful she is because she made all those mistakes? So what pattern is it that you want to demonstrate for your daughter? That got her to change. That was a powerful motivation. So in addition to being a counterexample, in that case, it's also a motivation piece. It's like she doesn't want it to be true for her daughter. Okay, so these are, again, it's nothing new. It's material that you have used in NLP before in different kinds of contexts. And so let's just take a quick exercise, say about 5 minutes. Now, we're going to have a standard exercise format that we're going to use for sleight of mouth patterns in general. And how about just a couple of people to walk through it with me? Okay, Jean? Great, come on up. What's that?
Reticent.
I know. Okay, so now we need one person to state a limiting belief. Anybody have one in mind already? Okay.
Oh, maybe that one. It's right there.
I know there's many there. I'm too old to fall in love.
Okay, great. So you'll be A, and then B and C will be the B and C team here. And so then the next thing is that person B points to a sleight of mouth category for C to use, right? B points and then C uses it. So Jean, why don't you point to one of those, counterexample or switched referential index, and then either not A, not B, A but not B, or not A yet B. Well, both one of, in this case, we need to distinguish both this, and then also one of these.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm curious, when is it that you have fallen in love?
When I was 16 was the first time I fell in love.
Okay, all right. So we just did the counterexample of B, and now I'm not calibrating to any shift, and I wouldn't expect the shift to happen just from counterexampling B alone in this case. So now we're going to, so we notice if there are shifts, and we don't have to get one. It's a learning experience. A shift won't occur from every single pattern. So now we're going to switch off. So you get to be over there, and I'll point out category for you. How about this?
What was you going to do here?
I'm too old to fall in love.
You're too old to fall in love.
And by the way, just to simplify that or clarify it a little bit, a way to restate it would be, because I am old, I cannot fall in love. So A is being old, and B is falling in love. Okay.
Because you're old, I cannot fall in love. So is there any time where you have seen Is there any time that you've seen somebody else who is older than you, perhaps an elder, in a grandfather age, who has fallen in love?
Okay, great. Now notice this pattern has a lot more impact, doesn't it? Okay, now having done that, we're also going to notice, did it fit the category offered? Yeah, he did this one, didn't he? So he kept A being the same, being old, and then he changed B, that they were able to fall in love instead. So now he gets to do the other one as well.
So we say
Not A would be, not A would be being young, and then B staying the same is still not being able to fall in love.
Oh, okay. So I totally backwards.
Which is fine. That's that category, and it's also a useful category.
Okay. So is there a time that you have so your limited belief is because I'm too old and I can't fall in love? And so again, with this switch A,
So who do you know?
So who do you know who is older or young and has not fallen in love?
Yes, that's right. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, thank you both. And that one was a little bit tricky because the original belief included a negation. So then when you negate a negative, then it becomes a positive, and it gets a little bit confusing. So I had a bit of a curveball there, but excellent demonstration of that. Okay, and then having done that, if we feel it's useful to stay with that same belief a little bit longer, we can, but then rotate around pretty quickly. So you want to click through a number of examples of limiting beliefs and applying these patterns to them. Okay, so go for it in groups of 3, and we'll take about this time, let's say about 5-6 minutes